It was April 2025 when geologists returned for the first time that year to the Norris Geyser Basin in Yellowstone. And during their routine checkup, they noticed that this time something was different. Where there had once been a dull patch of ground, now there was a huge crater, about 4 meters wide, filled with strange, milky, light blue water. Everyone was alarmed. Was this a sign that Yellowstone's supervolcano was about to erupt? If so, it would be a global disaster on a scale that could wipe out entire cities. According to the United States Geological Survey, the effects would be felt around the world. First, the areas closest to Yellowstone would be hit by pyroclastic flows. These aren't lava per se, but a very dense mix of volcanic gases, ash, pumice, and glowing hot rock blocks. These flows destroy everything in their path, and an eruption at Yellowstone would send them into Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. More distant areas would avoid these flows, but they would be blanketed by ash. The ash fallout would be especially heavy in states closest to the epicenter. Breathing in the ash would be particularly hazardous. The weight of the ash would also pose a serious threat. It would smother crops and collapse buildings as it accumulated. The tragic consequences would be countless, but we'll talk more about that later. Because shortly after the discovery, that strange hole shocked even the experts. The geologists found rocks scattered everywhere. Some were about 30 centimeters wide, and all were covered in gray mud. That mud matched the walls of the new thermal spring. It was as if the site had simply exploded, but no one saw it happen. The team reviewed old satellite images to find out when it appeared. In December 2024, the ground looked normal. By January 6, 2025, a small depression was already visible. And by February 13th, that water-filled hole was there. The strange thing was that the sensors that usually record major hydrothermal explosions didn't detect anything. There was no huge blast or warning signals. Later, they learned that this strange opening didn't appear all at once in a single explosion. It formed from several small bursts over time. At first, small explosions threw out rocks, then mud, and finally they dug out the hole. Over time, it filled with water rich in silica. That was a huge relief for everyone. Yellowstone sits atop a supervolcano, and its big explosions are a nightmare scenario. Luckily, this time it was a slow, small-scale eruption. Dramatic, yes, but completely manageable. Look, Yellowstone National Park is filled with geysers, hot springs, and all kinds of landscapes. But beneath the surface, things get intense because of the supervolcano. Now, supervolcanoes are usually massive. Often, they don't even have a cone because they're typically the remnants of gigantic magma chambers that, when emptied during massive eruptions, left behind a caldera. They're usually located over hotspots. It's no surprise they can cause super-eruptions. And when that happens, they hurl more than 1,000 cubic kilometers of ash, molten rock, and hot gases into the atmosphere. In other words, for super-eruptions could fill the Grand Canyon to the brim. Supervolcanoes form when huge volumes of blazing magma they rise from great depths. This magma climbs until it gets very close to the surface, but it fails to break through the crust. Instead, a pressurized pocket of bubbling magma accumulates just a few kilometers below the surface. The pressure keeps building because more and more magma tries to reach it. And then, boom, a super-eruption occurs. In 2015, researchers at the University of Utah mapped the main magma chamber of the Yellowstone Supervolcano and were stunned by its size. Then, they discovered another one beneath it. Together, those underground reservoirs could hold enough molten rock to fill the Grand Canyon 11 times over. All that magma pushes the ground upward. That's why Yellowstone rises by about 2 to 5 centimeters every year. That slow uplift might not sound like a big deal. But when you factor in that Yellowstone is still active and has a volcanic explosivity index of 8, it definitely makes you wonder what could happen if things get complicated. And yes, Yellowstone has been a bit restless in recent years. In March 2023, there were 354 earthquakes. Most were very small, but the largest reached a magnitude of 3.7, part of a swarm of 106. Now, before you panic, the experts at the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, they say there's no reason to panic. An eruption isn't coming anytime soon. Volcanoes don't follow a schedule. Just because Yellowstone hasn't erupted in a long time doesn't mean it's about to. For now, the park is stable. But the scientific community keeps a close eye on everything happening beneath the surface. The earthquakes, the ground uplifting, and even temperature changes just in case. The superheated magma plume, a hotspot beneath Yellowstone, has been active for 17 million years. The Earth's crust has been moving over it, and the hotspot left behind a chain of volcanoes stretching more than 720 kilometers. Along the Snake River Plain, most of those ancient volcanoes are now buried under layers of lava and sediment. In just the last 2.1 million years, Yellowstone has unleashed 3 catastrophic eruptions so massive they reshaped the landscape. Each explosion sent out pyroclastic flows, rivers of burning rock, ash, and pumice that traveled for miles around. The remnants piled up in layers tens of meters thick, and some solidified into hard, lava-like rock. When those eruptions emptied the underground magma chambers, the roof collapsed and the giant calderas we see today were formed. And even after those mega eruptions, Yellowstone didn't stop. Between 180,000 and 70,000 years ago, they rose to the surface huge flows of rhyolitic lava, sometimes more than 600 cubic kilometers. Some followed vent lines from north to south. The West Yellowstone flow occurred about 110,000 years ago. The Nespers Creek one was 160,000 years ago. If you stand at Madison Junction, on the northwest edge of the caldera, you'll see it. A cliff that formed when the Lava Creek Tuff eruption caused the ground to collapse 640,000 years ago. And inside the caldera, you'll see the hardened flows, snaking along the floor. Knowing when a supervolcano might erupt is like learning to read nature's warning signs. Thousands of years before a big eruption, the underground heat begins to rise. Magma chambers become like pressure cookers, ready to explode. Small signs start to appear, gas bubbles escape as pressure changes, and earthquakes shake the ground. The surface above rises slowly, cracks begin to open, hot springs and geysers grow restless and heat up more than usual. Now, what would happen if Yellowstone erupted? Remember the pyroclastic flows we talked about? They can have 2 parts. A dense current that hugs the ground and an ash cloud that travels above that current. Together, they would devastate huge areas. The ash could even reach Europe within 3 to 4 days after the eruption. Although it wouldn't be so severe there. Afterwards, it would take about 2 to 3 weeks for temperatures to drop worldwide, thanks to the sulfur dioxide that would reach the upper atmosphere following the eruption. Scientists estimate that the global temperature could drop by as much as 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. These effects could last between 6 and 10 years, ending the monsoons and causing widespread famine across Asia. Scary, right? Well, don't worry. The good news is that scientists don't believe the sleeping giant beneath Yellowstone National Park will awaken in our lifetime. Experts say that the next Yellowstone eruption, it probably won't happen for hundreds of thousands of years. And yet, maybe it's not as serious as we think, because they've discovered that the magma inside Yellowstone is spread out in 4 separate chambers. Not only that, it's likely that some of these magma pockets cool down and solidify, lowering the chances of an eruption. So, even though an eruption sounds like something that could change the world, it's very unlikely to happen anytime soon.